Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. As I said last week, this session will be focusing on 4 key priorities: education, housing, affordability, and public safety. But before we begin, I want to start by addressing the tragic situation yesterday in Coventry, which resulted in the tragic loss of a Border Patrol agent. First, I want to extend my heartfelt condolences to Agent Malin's family, friends, and colleagues. The FBI is leading this investigation, and the Vermont State Police will continue to assist in any way they can. Information is still being collected, and we don't have more to share at this point, unfortunately. But I ask that all of you, as members of the press, do your part and only report on the facts, not based on speculation, assumptions, or something some other media source has already misreported. That will be very helpful. Today, we're going to focus on housing. It's no secret that in every corner of the state, the lack of decent, affordable housing is a major concern. It's impacting Vermonters looking to move into an apartment or buy a home, and prevents us from growing our workforce. We hear it from employers all the time, who have offered jobs to people out of state who want the job and want to move here, but end up turning it down because they can't find a place to live. This lack of housing affects us in many other ways as well. It means fewer kids in our schools, fewer homes added to the grand list, which makes our schools even more unaffordable, and it puts pressure on our human services budget and contributes to our public safety challenges. Turning this around will take bold action so that we can generate more housing that's affordable and begin to reverse the demographic and affordability trends we've been facing for decades. We know we need about 7,200 more homes just to catch up, and about 40,000 more over the next 5 years. Earlier today, the Department of Housing released its Housing Targets Report, along with a dashboard, so we can see the progress we're making in real time. Right now, we're only building about a quarter of what we need to meet our targets, which is why it's important we focus on housing this legislative session, especially in areas like appeals and Act 250 regulation to make it faster, easier, and less expensive to build here. Commissioner Farrell will talk more about what we're proposing in a minute. But I want to be clear, we're not asking to get rid of Act 250 and land use regulation altogether, because I think we all agree we don't want houses to litter our mountainsides or development that replaces our farmland. What we're asking for is to make it easier and faster to develop in the places where it makes sense, where there's existing infrastructure or the ability to add to what's already there. So first, we need to make it easier to build new homes or renovate existing homes that a family could live in with a little work. Because revitalizing neglected homes will help revitalize communities and return rural communities into the vibrant economic centers they once were. Second, we need to strengthen and expand infrastructure that's critical to housing. And finally, we need regulatory reform, so it's more cost-effective for small-scale investors and home builders to build and fix up homes. We've seen the impact of the limited Act 250 exemptions already, so we'll be proposing to expand them further. Vermonters have been clear with us. The housing crisis is impacting them, whether it's someone looking to move into their first apartment, buy their first home, or a retiree who's looking to downsize. The lack of decent, affordable options makes it much more difficult. So I'm hopeful the legislature will work with us this legislative session to make changes to help their constituents and our communities. With that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Farrell.
Thank you, Governor. As the Governor said yesterday, the Department of Housing and Community Development rolled out our housing development targets, which are an annex to the Vermont Housing Needs Assessment, which came out earlier in the year of 2024. These targets were developed in collaboration with the regional planning commissions and Vermont Housing Finance Agency. So these latest targets will provide detailed and specific data for every region in Vermont with benchmarks for years 2030 and 2050. At a high level, that data sets an average annual production on the upper bound of just over 8,000 units statewide. But that statewide number does not tell the whole story. What lies behind the state-level data is the family who desperately wants to purchase a home, but can't compete in this market of scarcity and are stuck as renters, missing out on the satisfaction and the security of home ownership. It's the young couple who's dissatisfied with the poor quality of their rental unit, especially for the high price, but has nowhere to go because there's a shortage of options out there. It's the older couple, as the governor said, whose 4-bedroom home was once full with their children, but is now largely vacant, and there's no options for them to downsize. And it's the family struggling with the pain of homelessness, who wants nothing more than a safe, stable home of their own, but who's pushed out of a housing market with little to no vacancy, even when they have rental vouchers available to them. These targets are intentionally and thoughtfully distributed throughout the state, not just to meet the need, but to improve our demographic and economic outcomes. I want to recognize Representative Emily Krasnow, who's with us today, who worked hard to make sure that this was included in statute and to make sure that we are checking in on our progress every year. Paired with the housing targets, the state is going to be releasing the first version of its Housing Development in Vermont dashboard. This will enable regions and towns to track progress towards their housing goals and see with the greatest degree of precision where these units are being built and what type of homes they are. We're working with the regional planning commissions to break these down to the municipal level so that every member of the public and the town can understand that these targets are very attainable with the right local policy decisions. This data, in part, will be informing and be reflected in our housing bill. In the inaugural address, Governor Scott outlined the 4 pillars of our housing strategy, which have shaped the administration's omnibus housing bill, which will be released later this week. The first is strengthening our foundation for growth with new tools for financing and funding infrastructure to support home building. The second, reinvigorating our neglected communities with new tools, such as our rural downtowns and our villages and our mobile home parks, which have been neglected for decades. The third is upending our housing market dynamics, including expanding the bench of small-scale developers and making that more accessible to more Vermonters. And the fourth is breaking down procedural barriers, as the governor referred to, with our appeals, our permitting, and our regulatory processes. Now, the fourth bucket is largely going to get a lot of the focus and dominate a great deal of the conversation, for good reason, but all aspects of this housing bill thoughtfully complement each other. In the coming days, this omnibus housing bill is going to be introduced in the legislature, and details will be worked through in the committees, but today I want to talk through some of the specifics just so you know what the key aspects of the bill are. So first, on infrastructure, this bill, as I said, is going to include tools to support infrastructure investment for financing and funding infrastructure. One of those tools is going to be known as SPARK, Strategic Projects for Advancing Rural Communities, and this is going to be a mechanism for financing infrastructure and is going to be especially beneficial in communities that are smaller and struggle with the capacity to leverage other tools right now for financing infrastructure. You're also going to see us expand the applicability of existing tools, in particular the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, so that communities can access that. On appeals reform, we're going to be raising the standard for bringing appeals of housing developments to reduce the likelihood of frivolous appeals, particularly when a project aligns with the stated local and state land use regulations. We're going to be looking at timelines for appeals to be heard in the courts to expedite the resolution of these appeals when they are brought. We're going to work to rebalance appeals to hold appellants accountable for legal fees incurred by home builders up to a certain extent in the process of defending an appeal. Currently, all the risk is on a home builder, the folks that are trying to build homes to our communities, with very little or no risk on appellants. We need to rebalance that. We're going to raise the bar for what's known as the petition appeal or the 20-person appeal, formerly the 10-person appeal, which is a separate avenue for bringing an appeal in which you don't have to be a neighbor or have any other standing. You can just sign a petition and appeal a project. The current 20-person standard in Vermont is far out of line with national standards and is largely just used as a tool to prevent home building and mostly harming those who are most in need of housing here in Vermont. And finally, this bill will recommend changes to Act 181, the 2024 Act 250 Reform Bill. And to be clear, this is not a wholesale change to the legislation that was passed last year, but rather, as the governor indicated, it's building upon the positives in that bill and making adjustments based on the opportunities that we see, for example, in the early successes with the interim Act 250 exemptions. So specific adjustments to Act 181 include making Tiers 1A and 1B more accessible for more communities. These are the areas designed for growth in the future land use mapping, and we need to make sure more of our communities can attain those. We're looking to expand the areas included in the interim Act 250 exemption so that we can capture more of our areas that are served by municipal water and wastewater to be consistent with the land use of the last couple years, including the Home Act. We're looking to extend the interim Act 250 exemptions to avoid any gaps between the interim exemptions and the permanent long-term exemptions under Tiers 1A and 1B to reduce any uncertainty for home builders, as we know we need to ramp up right now. And we want to re-examine the establishment of a Tier 3 by taking time to understand whether there truly is a need for that and have a working group study that. Additionally, several programmatic and strategic investments are contemplated as key parts of the administration's housing proposal, and those investments would likely focus on doubling down on key initiatives that have proven to be successful, both at creating as many quality homes as possible with limited resources and focusing on the most vulnerable Vermonters. But at this time, budget development is still underway and we can't get in front of that. The budget will determine the specifics of the investments that are paired with these policy proposals. This housing bill, if fully adopted, will improve outcomes in every corner of Vermont. And importantly, it'll make investments in housing, whether it's federal, state, or private investments, it's going to make all of those investments go much further. With that, I'll pass it back to the governor.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now open it up to questions.
Can you provide more details on this infrastructure financing program in rural communities? How exactly would that work?
Yeah, okay, all right. I'll take a stab at this one. Are you talking about Spark that he's mentioned? So you've probably heard about TIF, or tax increment financing. So that has been a tool that has been very helpful to large communities that have resources. It's very challenging to lift. So what we've been hearing is that we need a tool that would be smaller scale, that developers or municipalities could use for a project, a smaller project. So it would be similar in that it could be used for like a project or a much smaller project. And it would work somewhat similarly where they would be able to, whether it be the municipality borrowing or the developer borrowing, they could use, so if you, best way I can describe it to you is like you have a property and it has a tax value today, and they can use the increment, the value that the project would be at the finish. They could use a portion of that value or that value to pay the debt back while that project over a period of time to help them make the numbers work to get that project online. So that's essentially basically taking this really big TIF program that hasn't worked for so long for so many small communities and making it so that we can bring much needed housing online or economic development projects within communities online. Can go into more detail with you, but rather than taking everybody in the weeds, it's the best thing I could do right now. Thanks.
Around this time last year, when you introduced a housing omnibus bill, you had a tripartisan group of lawmakers behind you. Do you have legislative buy-in for this bill that you say will be introduced later this week?
From what we've heard, I mean, there will be a number of people, I think, that will be interested in this. A number of legislators have voiced their concerns about housing over a long period of time. Obviously, that strategy didn't work as well last year. That bill was never taken up, never passed. So this year, with our major initiatives, as I've said, we're going to have limited sponsors, maybe one in each, the House and the Senate, maybe two, depending on if we can get buy-in from the majority party. But keep it limited, and then we'll track it. We'll have the bill number, and then we'll be able to report on that on a weekly basis. But this is our initiative, and we'll be able to point to that and hopefully find some support along the way.
Governor, is there anything that you and your administration are doing to respond to executive orders from President Trump, or anticipating executive orders that may be coming in the days and weeks?
Yeah, it's very difficult to keep up at this point. There was quite a slew of them yesterday. But I wanted to talk to my cabinet about that this morning. You know, there's going to be a lot of this from DC, and there's going to be a lot of attention about the what could be's and what's happening and some of these executive orders. And we're going to have to do our best to manage that. We can't react to every single issue that comes up, and we're going to have to prioritize because we have many challenges right here in our own backyard. So I think from our standpoint, we're going to react accordingly as need be, and prioritize the most egregious, and then we'll push back if necessary and embrace those that might be helpful and advantageous to Vermont. So we'll just have to take them one at a time. But at this point, there's nothing that I can see that we can do at this point with the ones I heard about, but I don't have the full magnitude.
And on that note, it's my understanding that the president declared an emergency for the southern border, which my understanding is that allows, the mobilization of more resources there. Is that something that you would want to see for the northern border?
I think we've been interacting with our partners, northern border partners, over the last few months, and I think there is a need for more resources. They certainly have suggested that. So hopefully they will get the support they need, the federal support they need from the federal entities that actually enforce the border.
For Commissioner Farrell, you mentioned making the tiers 1A, 1B more accessible. I guess, could you elaborate a bit more what you mean more accessible? And I guess I know with the veto override and everything, it's just been implemented this past summer going forward with different dates. But I guess looking back on that tier system, how would you say it's working so far?
Yeah, well, so of course the tiered system hasn't been implemented yet and will be implemented starting in mid-2026 and then phased in over a couple of years. But I'll answer the two parts of the question. First, the interim exemptions, which are intended to be sort of a proxy for Tier 1A and 1B areas, have been wildly successful. I mean, we've seen examples where projects have scaled up as a result of seeing these interim exemptions. We've seen projects really decide to come online faster because of this. And so the market's responding, and that is what we had indicated would happen last session. So looking at tiers 1A and 1B, we know that these exemptions from state permitting are beneficial. And so the way we want to make it accessible to more communities is making sure that things like, contracting capacity. We have small towns in Vermont. They might have the ability to contract for capacity. Right now in tier 1A, you have to have that hired staff full-time, and that is what is considered your capacity. But we have a lot of towns that could meet all the other requirements for Tier 1A except that one, because they would have contracted capacity. That's an easy one where why don't we give communities this opportunity? And then there's other onerous items such as certain historic preservation or natural resources commitments that are duplicative and redundant that we just don't need to put on our communities.
We'll move to the phones. Judy Whitcomb, Rutland Herald.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. I was curious, with all these new housing units we want to build, is there anything in these bills or programs that would prevent or curb them all from just becoming short-term rentals or something like that?
Sure. Certainly, I mean, so there are some provisions, not only in the new tiered system, but also in some of our programs that restrict the use. That if you look at it programmatically, certainly from VHIP all the way through some of the proposed tax freeze incentives, that's baked right in, that it needs to be primary use. And then I'd say there are going to be certain other circumstances where in order to meet the interim exemptions, you need to qualify as residential units, and that use is going to be examined by, especially if you go to district coordinator. So there are several check-ins where folks will see that these are primary residential use. Now, whether the market responds in certain areas and also decides to build vacation rentals to complement the rest of the housing stock, I think that may happen, but I think we're actually seeing the data level off in the number of vacation rentals in the state.
Thank you.
Tom Davis, Compass Vermont.
Thank you. Governor, would you mind describing to us what the interaction and dynamics have been working with the majority party so far this year compared to last year?
I think it's been very fruitful. We've been listening to one another. I think that we started off on the right foot, and I appreciate the pro tem and the speaker for their coming together with us to support some of these big initiatives. So we'll see what happens, but so far so good.
Are you also getting a sense of some of the plans to try and continue this development throughout the state? Are they being amenable to the fact that this 2-year period is really, are they seeing the opportunities provided for significant housing to be built across the state?
Well, we'll see. I think that Vermonters spoke clearly about the need for more housing. I think many legislators have seen that in their own communities. So I have to hope and believe that we'll have some movement on this. Whether we'll get everything we want remains to be seen, but I'm hopeful that we can work together on this, because this really is one of the bottlenecks we face in terms of working our way out of the situation we find ourselves in with demographics and some of our challenges funding education and so forth.
Thanks very much.
Back to the room.
When you look at the, this new housing data dashboard and these targets, is there any sort of new revelation on the housing needs that you see out of that kind of new data set?
Just the sheer magnitude of how far behind we are. I think that's what struck me. But
Nate, do you have anything to add?
How do you think the new administration's climate policies could affect Vermont reaching our climate goals, if at all?
Well, the time will tell. Obviously, we want to address some of that as well. We believe that we have to accomplish our goals, but within a time period that doesn't outpace our ability to pay and put people at risk because of the pace that was set. So we'll continue to do what we need to do here in the state to accomplish our climate goals at a rate that we can afford.
In speaking to the tragedy of Officer Malin's death, you implied that maybe some of the reporting has not been entirely accurate. Are there specific facts you can point to that you've seen that just aren't true?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what I've read, but from what I understand, I couldn't confirm one way or the other some of the things I've read, and I should be somewhat in the know. So if I can't, I don't know how they can. And when you report it, in the tinderbox we're living in right now, with what's happening in D.C., I think it's unfortunate, and I think it could lead to, a lot of unrest, and we just don't need that right now. We can't live in chaos for the next 4 years. We have to manage this and do our part and tamp things down so that we can come together and solve the problems that we have here in the state and across our nation.
Looks like there's one more question online. Tim, Vermont Business Magazine.
Governor, as you know, speaking of interacting with the legislative leadership, the TIP program not only being very complicated, but also getting blowback from some legislators because of the impact on the education fund, which of course affects property taxes, and also seen by some as kind of a giveaway to developers. Can you respond to those issues?
Yeah. We've heard that rhetoric from a small number of legislators. I think the vast majority of communities that have used TIFs have benefited. And you would have to, if it impacts our ed fund, you would have to buy into the notion that those projects would have gone ahead without TIFs. And I don't believe that to be the case. As someone who has done my share of developing without some incentives in some way, you're likely not to make the numbers work. So with the case of TIFs, it makes the project work for that community. And had it not been for TIFs, we wouldn't have any new revenue for the Ed Fund in the years to come. The grand list grows the more projects that are built. And I think, again, if you look back over the last number of years, Winooski is a great example, Burlington, Milton, there are many communities that have had successful TIFs, and they're benefiting from that today. It may not have seemed like it in the beginning, but today they're benefiting.
Thank you, Governor.
Any final questions?
Was hoping to get your reaction, Governor, to the lawsuit that the ACLU filed against the Department for Children and Families. Had you been aware of this docket that they allege tracking high-risk pregnancies?
I had not. And obviously, there's not much I can add to that. The lawsuit's been filed. I might ask Chris Winters if he's on, whether he wants to add anything, but I don't know the details of that, and I was surprised to read about that as well. Chris, is there anything you want to add to that?
Sure. As the governor said, we're reviewing the lawsuit right now. We're not able to comment at this time. I think, just to tie into what the governor said earlier, I'd be careful about assuming anything about the facts of this situation. What we have is a plaintiff's lawsuit, and so the rest of the facts will certainly come out through the legal process. And so we can't comment specifically on the circumstances surrounding this particular case. We have to respect the privacy of the individuals involved. But I will say that we really do take our mission of protecting children and supporting families seriously. We have to balance that with the safety and well-being of children with the rights of the parents involved. We'll be taking a very close look at this. We'll issue some clarifying information in the statement once we've really had an opportunity to review the lawsuit and investigate the claims made within it.
Thank you all very much.